Well, unless I hear an objection, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And we're privileged to do so. Welcome here today for meeting number 3.
Recording in progress.
And this meeting is being recorded. So we're coming to meeting number 3 of the State Water Resources Control Board's Division of Drinking Water expert panel to review the proposed criteria for direct potable reuse. Next slide, please. Welcome. I'm Kevin Hardy, the Executive Director of the National Water Research Institute. We're privileged to be here, and I want to welcome everyone on the call around the world. We've got quite a crew, and we want to get right to the business of the day. So we'll go to the next slide. I want to say again that NWRI is privileged to. I want to advance slide. There we go. NWRI is privileged to facilitate this panel. We're also the nation's collaborative resource for the advancement of water resources science, policy, and innovation. The independent expert advisory services provider of choice for the most challenging water quality, resource management, and related innovation issues. And we strive to provide insight and understanding of current and future issues in water science and technology. Next slide. I want to welcome all of our panelists from around the world, our 2 co-chairs. First, good afternoon, Mr. Crook from Massachusetts, where I know it's cold today. Good morning to co-chair Adam Olivieri from the East Bay. I want to say good morning to Dr. Richard Bull, and good evening to Dr. Jörg Dreves from Germany. Good morning to Dr. Charles Gerba. And I think it's just turning this afternoon now for Dr. Haas and Dr. Pruden. Welcome to you both. It's 1 o'clock in the morning for Shane Snyder. Shane, I hope you're on there and keeping the Lion City energized this morning. I'd also like to welcome Jackie Taylor, George Chabanaglas, and Mike Weiner, who round out our panel. I want to thank each of you for the diligent work over the last 6 months. It's been an incredible ride. We're honored to work with such a group. We get to learn from you each and every day, so thank you. I wanted to kind of think about something today, to find something unusual about the group and how we've come together. And what I found at looking at temperatures from around the Northern Hemisphere today is that everything's normal. It's cold in the Northern Hemisphere everywhere. And that's just the way it's supposed to be. So we're happy that something normal happened for the first time in a while. And I'd like to report that it's normal to be cold in the Northern Hemisphere in January. That's my insight for today. Next slide. Our objectives today and the kind of promise today as we get done today, we'll be kind of have everybody up to speed on the status of the review that the panel's done on the subset of issues that they've worked on so far. Everyone will get an opportunity to hear from both DDW and the co-chairs and panelists, have a kind of a dialogue about the presentation from the co-chairs. And then we'll have some public comments as well. And this is something that's going to be important for the record and for DDW. Next slide. Here's our agenda to get that done. We got a quick hour, so we're at 9:04. We're on schedule now. Adam's and Jim are gonna give a quick report out of the work that's been done to date. We're gonna have some dialogue with DDW about that report out, and then we'll move into public comments at 9:45. Next slide. Hey, meeting ground rules as usual. Thanks for being patient. We're all getting used to this this milieu. We'll keep ourselves muted unless you recognize the speaker saves bandwidth. I think it makes it safe for everybody. We've also been keeping our cameras off. I know people have different views on that, but we've been keeping our cameras off again, a nod to bandwidth. You can use either the internet and your computer or a phone. If you do use your phone, make sure you sign in so we can identify who's speaking. And as I mentioned at the top of this introduction, this meeting is being recorded. Next slide. Now, this is an important part. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. I don't want to take too long, but I think it's important that we leave this up for just a minute. For those of you who are here and are interested in making a public comment, we got 3 rules here for you. You need to send an email to the DDW staff and let them know. The reason for the email is to request a special link and a passcode. They'll send it back to you if you put in the subject line DPR Criteria Expert Panel Meeting 3. In the body of that email, let the DDW staff know your name, who you represent, whether it's yourself as an individual or an organization, whether you intend to make your comments by video conference or phone. And for your phone commenters, we needed the last 3 digits of your phone number from which you intend to call so that we can identify you and get you patched in to the meeting. So those are the rules for public commenters. We'll bring those up later when we start the public comment session. But again, there you have it. Next slide. Okay. Thanks for that momentary introduction. We look forward to the rest of the meeting, but now we're going to kick it off in earnest with some introductory comments from our two panel co-chairs, Mr. James Crook and Mr. Adam Olivieri. Adam, take it away.
Good morning. I'm just trying to get, here we go. Good morning, everybody. I have the distinct privilege, if I can get everything working here, of making this presentation on behalf of the panel. Next slide, Jing. This is, as Kevin mentioned, our third meeting. We have another one scheduled February 28th, and I know the state has posted that, and potentially a fifth to be determined. Next slide. These are the expert panel's interim comments and recommendations. Again, I would really, without reading this particular slide, I'd really like to thank and appreciate the quality of information provided by DDW, as well as the WRF researchers, as well as the collaborative and collegial working relationship we've had with DDW staff, as well as within the panel. I'd like to say that. Next slide. Two important bullets here. And these are overarching bullets. While the focus of our review is to determine if the proposed code provides adequate public health protection relative to the risk posed by water being produced, there's a significant concern about unintended consequences, particularly related to energy consumption, excessive energy use, and a carbon footprint. A responsive, sustainable, and cost-effective approach to developing these regulations includes recognition by the State Board of potentially over-engineered treatment barriers and requires an intentional effort by DDW to develop a reasonable number in combination of such barriers. Next slide. Relative to RWA, the panel has reviewed the draft criteria again after carefully listening to the rationale provided by DDW staff at meeting 2 for not defining RWA specifically within the draft criteria. While the panel agrees the DDW's intent is to keep the criteria broad enough to cover all forms of DPR, the panel still believes that clearly defining RWA in the criteria or as part of the statement of reasons is appropriate and necessary. Next. Communication and notifications. All notifications to the public and public agencies need to be consistent with those currently required as part of the California Potable Water Regulations and Safe Drinking Water Act. And references to existing potable water notification regulations should be included in the DPR criteria. The focus on developing a program of close communication and coordination with local and state public health agencies, as well as major hospitals within the DIPRA service area, DIPRA as defined within the criteria, is an important element of the draft criteria. Next. The focus on the next several slides is going to be specifically on the chemical control criteria, and these are specific recommendations from the panel. Recommend that the ozone BAC processes are placed before the RO process to manage low molecular weight compounds. Recommend delete the applied ozone TOC dosage language and include a requirement to develop project-specific dosage as part of the engineering report clause. Recommend using acetone and formaldehyde as BAC performance indicators. Next slide. Recommend two specific performance indicators for ozone. Recommend nitrate online monitoring for ozone feed water. And then alternatives relating to ozone BAC should be addressed as part of the alternative clause. Next. Focusing on the engineering reporting section of the criteria, include a requirement to define a chemical peak as part of monitoring and plant operation. These are specific to things that should be asked for with engineering clause that the project proponent would have to provide. Use the DPR4 as a WRF project as a guidance document. Include a requirement to address optimizing the secondary treatment process. Criteria need to result in producing stable and high quality, fully nitrified water for the advanced water treatment facility. Include a reference to TMF documents that DDW will use to review and approve TMF plans. Again, this could be in the statement of reasons. Next. Here's some specific comments on the stable water coming out of the secondary. Include a requirement to address other plant operation and performance issues such as changing wastewater characteristics, climate change, influent flow and low equalization, wastewater treatment plant optimization to reduce energy and chemical use at the AWPF, equalization and treatment of return flows. Include a requirement to develop project-specific ozone TOC dosage as part of the engineering report clause. It's a restatement there. Include a requirement to assess cybersecurity plans or to develop a plan. Next. Other items not falling under a specific category here are include a criterion that requires 24/7 operation for 12 months before considering requests for reducing the number of operators and or staff operations. Next, include a clear linkage in the criteria of the State Water Board recycle water policy for CECs that should be monitored, the monitoring trigger levels, and a response action plan. Those are all laid out in previous State Water Board policy. The criteria include TOC monitoring in several locations. The use of the 0.5 milligram per liter TOC as written could imply that TOC is a health-based criteria. The criteria and the statement of reason should clarify that TOC is not a health-based criteria. Next slide. Criteria should include specific timeframes and digital formats for submitting monitoring data to the State Board and DDW. Include a 20-year life cycle planning horizon for the DIPRA joint plan and a 10-year life cycle analysis update every 5 years. Next. On the pathogen criteria, that's currently being reviewed by the panel. Our expectation essentially is to have that done very shortly and report out on it at the February meeting. The panel is, like I said, currently reviewing the technical basis for the assumption of LRVs, and we'll report out on it. The panel agrees with DDW draft that existing drinking water treatment processes that have been validated for LRVs and approved by DDW do not need to be revalidated. Next. Additional clarification is needed for interpreting the criteria, possibly in the statement of reasons on how alternates to the LRVs are addressed within the criteria, such there is no need to expand the alternatives clause to cover pathogen controls. And then future topics that we may cover at the February report out, touch on or could touch on enhanced source control, wastewater collection system monitoring, and blending as a process. Next slide. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Adam. I would ask if Randy Barnard or Robert Brown would want to kind of kick off the Q&A or any presentations the DDW staff is interested in making, or to kick off just a Q&A period. Randy, Bob?
Sure, I could start out here for our side. I just want to start by echoing what Adam said as far as the collegiate work atmosphere between the expert panel and DDW. So we appreciate too the depth and breadth that the expert panel has been taking looking at these regulations. So it's obvious we're all on the same page. We want to make sure public health is protected and that we're making the best regulations we can. So we very much appreciate all the comments you guys have been giving us. I do want to start out, I guess, by making the first request. What we would ask is, we appreciate the extent of all the comments we're getting. So to help us to be able to prioritize and organize those comments, it would be helpful if the expert panel could separate those somehow so that we have a group of comments that would be necessary for the panel to have answers to, so that they can determine if the regulations are protective of public health. And then another group of comments that are auxiliary to all those, so that we can focus on the top priority ones and get those to you as soon as we can. So that's just my first ask, and I'll open this up for the rest of our staff to jump in there with other questions.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah, I'd like to invite them as well. So other folks from BDW, please, it's an opportunity to have some dialogue with the expert panel.
Yeah, hi, this is Jane Chow. Yeah, that was a lot of information and a lot of recommendations and comments from the panel. So Adam or Jim, do you have any feedback on what Randy was saying just now regarding, which ones you think we can focus on for discussion today?
Well, Jing, I think that, I'll start out and the rest of the panel can chime in. I think the ones where we've made specific recommendations on the chemical controls, on how various things, like, for example, the notification, most of those, I think you guys could address pretty rapidly. I think the holistic type analysis that should be done dealing with over-engineering, some of that will be, we'll have to discuss that further as we get into the LRV discussions for pathogens. And some of that, I believe, is not necessary to address specifically before we have to prepare the finding. This is my own opinion. But more importantly, as you move forward with your environmental document, your CEQA documentation, as you develop the regulations to run them through the administrative process. So I think those are the big sort of compartmentalization in terms of what Randy was asking for, and I think what you're asking for. So with that, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, you're either going to agree or disagree with us on where ozone BAC goes, or agree or disagree that the ozone TOC criteria should be a criteria or should be something that's included within the engineering section, or you'll agree or disagree with the recommendations we've made, what should go into, what should expand, which specifically requested for an engineering report. I think those are pretty clear, and it's kind of in your court now to decide whether you agree or disagree, or we need to discuss further before you agree or disagree. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does it, in the panel, please speak up. I mean,
Yeah, those Jing, those recommendations kind of begin, I think, about slide 14. And so if that's any help, maybe you could bring those up and we could walk through that piece of the presentation, and maybe this would provide that kind of focus, at least until we get to those broader sorts of issues.
Okay. Stop me when I get to
that's it right there. I would say, I'm thinking the raw water augmentation, probably a bigger picture issue. Adam, panelists agree?
Well, I think it's something I think the panel feels pretty strongly about defining raw water augmentation. And we heard very carefully what Bob Holquist said in terms of the three various factors, and all three of them really tied to blending. We heard that, and we've offered a solution there. Somehow it needs to be tied to their criteria and part of the record, the regulatory record, and that could be in the statement of reasons or directly within the criteria would be the first option. So that's something that the staff at DDW are going to have to really decide on, because I think they already said they felt like they did it, and they explained they did it very broadly to cover everything. So the ball's in their court on that.
And we appreciate that. We appreciate the suggestion as far as putting it in the statement of reasons, because that's an option we can look at.
Okay, good. So let's move to the next slide then. Now this is communication and notification. So Adam, maybe a quick introduction, then Randy comments, Jane comments.
Yeah, so the one comment I have on this is maybe, so you're saying that we need to be consistent with the current requirements for notification. And yeah, and I think that's what we were shooting for, with this regs. And I think on top of it, we have certain requirements for notification that is, to provide a more timely notification. So that might go above current regs. So I hope that is what you guys meant, to be consistent with, is that, the baseline is consistent. All the processes are consistent. It's just the timing. Sometimes in this draft, we have this more quicker responses and that kind of thing. So.
Does the panel want to speak up, or? Okay, I'll take it on. I'll carry the water. I think, Jim, we understood that. And I think one of the things that we were concerned about here is that we don't create an environment that confuses or frightens utilities, other cities that may be receiving the information. And they're looking at it as, gee, aren't we providing a drinking water that's consistent with and as safe as, or more protective than existing potable water supplies? And isn't this now considered part of our existing potable water supplies? And would be confusing and frightening those sort of public agencies in terms of, what do I do with this information that I'm getting? And so anchoring it back, recognizing that we're going way beyond the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act for treatment and reporting to the state is one thing, but reporting everything out and creating potential confusion. And I'll go on record as saying, similar to Prop 65, people ignore it. They've been, they see it so much now, they ignore it when they walk into a store. They go, oh, okay. You don't want to create that type of environment. I don't know if I said it as bluntly or clearly as I could have, but any of the other panel members want to chime in? Maybe.
Panelists, don't be shy now.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Adam, the only thing I would add is, you don't want to over notify, because that way you can get fatigue on the part of the public when they really need to take action if that need arises in response to a real event.
Yeah, that's the Prop 65 example, Chuck. Exactly.
Okay.
This is Mike. I agree. I think one of the things we don't want to do is desensitize the governing bodies, the water utilities, and the public to notifications, so that eventually they come to feel that all notifications are the same, and some that really represent a public health concern are not taken as seriously because they've been so desensitized by receiving notifications for things that are not a critical public health concern.
Jing and Randy, does that help?
Yeah.
Adam, this is Jackie.
Yes.
I'd like to add to that, and I concur with what the panelists have said thus far, but I'd also like to extend that to suggest that if there are areas in current code that are not as protective as they need to be, that perhaps DDW can take this opportunity to strengthen those codes, because there have been some instances where locals have felt like perhaps there were not enough public notifications timely released or with accountability associated with them. So I don't want to add more work to DDW, but I would suggest that if you see any weaknesses there, or if you've gotten feedback from locals that say, we'd like to strengthen the codes in this manner, then I think if this would be an opportune moment to do that.
So Jackie, just a point of clarification, that would mean across the board for all drinking water, not
right.
Just, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is Robert Brownwood. I do appreciate that comment, Jackie. Kind of the thought on this is not that we're going to do notifications at every slight violation, but it's more similar to the filtration avoidance criteria for the surface water treatment rule, that those particular water systems that have filtration avoidance are required to do extra concern or care with the public and with the local health agencies. If they see something going on, then it's just to have a plan to alert everybody that something may be going on in the public, similar to what happened with Milwaukee, and when a lot of shelf products were flying off the shelves and people were getting sick. We just want to be able to have something so that if something like that's going on, we're alerted to it and we're able to respond to that situation. So it's not something that a single violation of a treatment process or something would require this type of alerting.
So Robert, this is Adam. If I understand you right, what you're saying is in situations where people get an exception to treat drinking water before they serve it to the public, you're equating that to potentially a DPR project.
Well, they don't get exception on the filtration avoidance. They just know that San Francisco and one other community in Northern California has a program set up with their local health department that if people start getting sick with a potential issue, that they can start alerting the city and the water treatment. That's the similar concept here, is if there's something happening in the public, an outbreak of some type of disease or something, that we would look deeper at the DIPRA plant as maybe that's the cause.
So are the reporting requirements then that are in the criteria similar to that concept of extra care that you're mentioning?
I think that's what you're asking, and Jing would be able to answer that since she's written these things. I thought that's what we're asking is what are those criteria? How do we set that up? But Jing, maybe you can answer what we actually put in the regs. I don't have them memorized. Sorry, Adam.
No, it's okay. I just trying to figure out the baseline here.
Yeah, I think the criteria, the public notification would be for the really acute failures. So if you don't do the LRVs, the what's that, 15?
No, what I was asking, Jing, is not what they're for necessarily, but are they similar to the program that Robert was describing?
Yeah.
Extra notifications.
Oh yeah. There are extra notifications, depending on the source you are using and maybe the additional risk. So like for I think filtration avoidance, there are requirements like if your source water quality gets worse, you can't avoid filtering. So then there are things that you have to do, and some of that could include the public notification.
But Jing, I think Adam's question is, in our DPR criteria, do we have kind of those actions spelled out? Is that what you're asking, Adam?
Yeah. Are they spelled out and tied to something that already exists for a similar type drinking water program within California? Or are we going above and beyond the notifications? Which is what, when we read, several of us read it, we looked at it and said, boy, these are way beyond the Safe Drinking Water Act and California public water notifications. That was our take.
Yeah, I think the notifications that we included, I think, are appropriate for that risk. So it's situations where if your DPR project is delivering water that doesn't meet, I think there were 3 conditions or 4 conditions, then they have to meet. Then we consider that an acute failure of the DPR plant, and then customers will need to be notified. There are other communications notifications in the criteria that are notifications of the public agencies that receive the water, such as when your plant stops producing water. Well, you really need to notify the downstream public agencies in a timely manner. So there's different notification requirements. Some to the public to the agencies that receive the water, and then some to the public. And I think the ones to the public we're limited to the big items, like if your plant is failing or has failed, And then there's also notifications as FYI notifications, like if you detect a chemical above the notification act level and that kind of thing, then you have to notify your governing bodies so that, you know, like your county supervisors or your city managers that, hey, you know, we found these things in the water. So there's various different notification requirements, and, you know, those are kind of consistent with how we can operate the Safe Drinking Water Act, you know, because some of those things we are required to do, like those notifications for PFAS, PFAS, and else, that kind of thing.
This is a question this is a question to the panel. Would it be useful to sit and talk with staff at DDW and maybe compare, you know, come up with a table that compares what's in the DPR draft criteria against the drinking water notifications, as well as the filtration avoidance type notifications, just as a compare and contrast?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, Adam. Yeah, we could do that. And also I was thinking we could look at our extremely impaired source documents on if we have anything in there for the permits we write. So I think that's something we can do.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you, Robert.
Yes,
Yep.
thank you. All right, that was well done. Well, it's 9:32. We're making good progress. I suggest we go to the next slide. Well, I appreciate all that commentary, and I think that we reached a good outcome there. We'll take a look and be able to make an objective comparison to address that concern. Let's move into the chemical control criteria. Randy, Robert, Jing.
Brian?
Yeah, I was just going to invite Brian or Bob
Brian.
to jump in there too. Holquist, anybody who's got it.
Okay, we're bringing in the big guns.
That's right.
Well, I'll go mute then.
That the ozone and BAC processes are before the RO process. Can you provide some more rationale about this recommendation?
York, I can do it, but I'd rather have you or Shane do it if you're online.
Yeah, happy to do that. So the main issue here is that in order to maintain the biological function of that BAC, you need to have some substrate left in the water that the bugs can grow on. And the TUC limits are well below 0.5 milligram per liter. And it would be quite difficult to maintain this biological function, which actually is quite important when we think of spikes like acetone or formaldehyde, as we have observed in the San Diego demo project. They would not necessarily be captured. And conditioning a BAC or a BAC after RO with providing additional carbon sources is not really an option. So that's our main concern. It's more practical issues that would limit really the viability of that combination at that point in the treatment process.
Can't hear you, Brian.
Yeah, I barely hear whoever's talking.
This is Brian Bernados. I'm just composing my thoughts and wanted to just say that thank you for these recommendations, and we are trying to incorporate that into our language. The recommendation to be before makes a lot of sense, and we appreciate the two chemical indicators, acetone and formaldehyde, for biological process, BAC, and on the next slide, the carbamazepine and sulfamoxyl, good performance indicators for ozone. And certainly online monitoring for ozone, we appreciate that. And yes, we want to consider alternatives in the alternative clause. we are still trying to consider the ozone to TOC ratio possibly as a design requirement, but the requirement would not be to operate to that, so that there would be flexibility to determine on a site-by-site basis what the proper ozone to TOC ratio should be, but also make it flexible so that if need to increase it, there is the design capacity for that, which reviewing a lot of studies, it seems to be as depends on site by site. The requirement with
We lost him.
Let me just jump in and add that, Brian mentioned the alternatives clause. So suppose if we require that the ozone BAC be early in the process so that you have enough substrate, it could be possible that a specific project could be invited to demonstrate that putting it after the RO, for instance, it could be somehow designed to be effective. That option could be left open to them. But the burden would be on them to demonstrate it.
Excellent. Any more comments or questions? I think we got some good.
Brian, did we lose Brian on that call?
I think I still see him signed in. I think that maybe there was an interruption in his service or something, because I can visually see him and I can see him moving. So maybe it was just some sort of audio issue.
So I was just going to, I didn't quite capture what he said about the ozone TOC dosage language, whether it would stay in the criteria document or be a requirement as part of the engineering report to be project specific. I kind of got lost in where that was headed. Did you get it, Jorg, or you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think I understood, Brian, that he's contemplating to still consider this as a design criteria, which totally makes sense. This essentially would also fall out of the requirement to meet the certain performance indicator removal. And an operator would have to set this limit anyway for operation. So as a design criteria, I totally agree. But the current version has set a certain limit that needs to be demonstrated. And that's something where we don't see a need for. We also see some issues associated with that related to a byproduct formation, for instance, bromate formation, if it's excessively high. So I think that's fine if it goes into a design criteria and it is reported in the engineering report.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's kind of where I was headed, but I wasn't quite sure. I felt like I had one leg in each world.
Well, we really appreciate that comment. We'll take a look at it internally and keep you guys informed in which direction we go.
Well, move on.
All right.
These are all, recommendations to kind of beef up what's in the engineering report for DPR projects.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Anything in here you object to or need clarification on?
Yeah, so I think one thing I see here is you have climate change. So in the engineering report, it's a technical document. So what specifically about climate change would you like to be included?
I don't know, maybe flooding.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Start there, start simple.
That's it. Okay. So that those kinds of things. All right.
I agree with the flooding. It could also be temperature changes. Could affect the characteristics.
This is Chuck Gerber. Increase in temperatures has been shown to increase the resistance of certain viruses to disinfectants. So that could have an impact.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's great information.
Mhm. Okay, I don't think I have any other comments on this. Anybody else?
Okay, maybe move to slide 19.
Okay. Okay. So for the 24/7 operation, you're looking at, you want 12 months of operation before we consider any request for reducing the number of operators and or having the plant operate unstaffed. Can you provide some the rationale or your thinking behind this one?
Well, it seems logical that you don't necessarily want to make that decision before they start operations. At least the way we read it, that could be the case. Maybe we misread the criteria, but it seemed logical to actually have stable operations beforehand and then have the project proponent or DIPRA or however that joint powers works come back and say, we've got stable operations. We think we can manage with less, or we think we can manage in certain cases as unmanned, depending on the size of the facility. That was the thought behind that. Prove it before you start cutting it.
Right. So that implies that if they make any changes in treatment, as down the line, that at any type of change that they make, we would kind of bring it back to staffed, right? Operation, maybe additional operators if necessary.
Well, yeah, that could be one of the factors. It could be other factors. Could be they've shown with 12 months of operation at 24/7 that they don't really need that to keep a stable plant operation. They can do it with less than a AWT5 operator. Don't necessarily need the same staff on weekends. There's a whole bunch of different options, but it's really what they see in the first 12 months could dictate what they ask for and justify it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And going forward.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thanks for that comment.
Adam, I would just add, I don't think any change would trigger a new 12-month clock, but something significant, just tweaking a chemical dose wouldn't do it. But, if they're adding new chemistry or a new unit operation to the system, clearly that would.
I agree, Chuck. I didn't mean to imply.
Yeah.
Okay. Comments on this page? Thank you.
Anything else? Here on slide 19.
This is Brian again. I have a question for the expert panel on the second bullet about the recycled water policy for CECs. And I think I understand where the panel is coming from, having been invited to observe in 2018 the rating of that report and the rationale behind it. And I would ask that, due to the way the administrative procedures is written, it'd be better for us to link it in the statement of reasons rather than to formalize it in criteria that is hard to modify in the future. And so would that be acceptable to try to address this CEC issue in the statement of reasons?
I guess, Brian, my initial reaction, this is Adam, my initial reaction is that the CEC policy is actual regulation. Is that correct?
Well, you'd have to talk to a lawyer about the difference between, but I think there is some differences, but
There's slight difference, yeah.
Yeah. So what at a minimum, what you could do is you can acknowledge the existing regulation within the new regulation, and then you can expand upon what your expectations are within the statement of reasons. But I think not linking them is problematic. Mainly because the CEC panel developed a list of compounds that should be measured along with triggers and along with a response plan to deal with them as you develop the raw water source that would eventually be treated through an AWT facility for public consumption. So it just seems odd not to use that work or tied to an existing policy/regulation. So I'll let you think about the best way to do it and use it to your advantage without locking yourself into the future necessarily.
Yeah, one thing about the difference between the policy and the regulation is regulation will have to go through the whole AOL process. So if we, depending on what you mean by how we tie it in, depending on what that looks like, how we tie it in, and then if the policy changed, we'd have to go through the entire reg process to change our regs again. It wouldn't be as simple as changing the policy. So that's the only reason there may be some hesitation, but we can look at how we could do that. We are in a lot of other areas, like with the AWWA waterworks standards and such. We are trying to figure that out at the board level too.
So I guess the important thing, Robert, is the acknowledgement that exists and it's tied into your sort of how your monitoring plan is developed, or how the DIPRA develops their monitoring plan and what they're looking at in the response to those triggers and actions.
Yeah.
How it gets embedded, I'll leave it to you and your lawyers.
Yeah. No, and you're right, because the Office of Administrative Law doesn't like any ambiguity on regulations. So if we say something like it's tied to something that could change, then at times they may, if they catch it. So yeah, it's something we'll, like you said, discuss.
Yeah, I also this is an aside. I had assumed that the CEC policy or the recycled water policy went through OAL.
Hi, Adam. This is Shirley Rosalella. So I just want to kind of add to what our other DDW staff has been saying. So the recycled water policy is regulation, but is specifically a water quality control policy. And like you said, it went through the APA process, although they for water quality control policies, it kind of goes through this special part of the APA. But I think particularly when we're looking at this particular recommendation, the difficulty with linking is that so the procedures will not allow us to pitch proposed regulations to like an evolving reference. So if we're going to make a reference, it should be a static reference. So say if you want it to be tied to the last version of the recycled water policy, we can make those reference and include it as as a incorporated reference, but pointing to like latest version of recycled water policy, that would be something that we would need statutory exemption for, like we do for the cross-connection policy control handbook that we're currently developing. So, more clarity on exactly what the panel is looking for. And I think you're alluding to CEC monitoring specifically, but that's really the primary difficulty. And the alternative of if we don't have a statutory exemption for pointing to an evolving reference, is that we would have to open up the regulations every time the recycled water policy is amended. And I guess I also would like to understand whether, do you mean to point to recycled water policy or the CEC panel recommendations? Because not all recommendations of the CEC panel gets taken up by the policy.
Thank you, Shirley. Well said. Not very nice could say it.
Yeah, thanks, Shirley. I kind of thought that was your problem, but thanks for stating it for the record. I think we could work it out. I think we can figure out a way around it where you're dealing with a static reference and then you're dealing with a changing ground rules as part of the statement of reasons, or at least acknowledging that. And how it might get embedded, say, in updates to the DIPRA plans. I think there's a way around all that noise.
Yes, I think there is too, and I really appreciate this conversation. I do want to oh, go ahead, please.
It sounds to me, Adam, like you're recommending that the project continue to look at the CEC monitoring. And so maybe that gets part of the engineering report.
Yeah, and it could also be, once it's part of the engineering report, depending on how you guys carry that forward into both NPDES and Safe Drinking Water Act permits. That's the other linkage. That's how you'll implement it. Yeah, I think there's ways that we could work out where I think the panel could be comfortable that actually the work that's being done and coming out of the CEC, evolving CEC policies get captured in the appropriate permits, et cetera. Does that make sense, Robert, Brian, at all?
I think we hear you, but it's just, and we'll definitely investigate what we can do, but we may have to come back to you and say, here's a route we'd have to take. So
that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I know that the utilities will really appreciate that linkage and even more clarity in their requirements. So before we move on, any other comments here? I want to be sensitive to our time and check in with the DDW staff as to whether or not we have any public comments. I understand we have one. Do we have any more?
No, I've received one request.
Okay. Well, I'm showing it to be 9:53, and we'd indicated that we wanted to get to the public comments at 9:45. So I would say to the co-chairs, with your blessing, I would suggest that we move now to public comments, move forward on that, and that'll give us a few minutes to do any cleanup and follow-up before the meeting ends. Adam, Jim?
Yeah, sure. No, it works for me. I was enjoying the conversation with DDW.
Works for me too, Kevin.
Yeah, it was a good conversation. We really appreciate everyone's openness and kind of preparation for the material that we talked about. Thank you again. It's a privilege to work with you. Now, Jing, if you could go back to slide 8, we'll kind of walk through the public comment process again really quick and then kick it off. There it is. Perfect. So I know we have one person waiting to speak, but if there's anyone else on the call or online, here are the 3 rules. It's an email to DDW staff. Write in the subject line, DPR Criteria Expert Panel Meeting 3. And in that email, tell us who you are, who you represent, whether you're joining by phone or video conference. And if you're joining by phone, give us the last 3 digits of the phone you're going to call from so that we can identify you positively. So those are our rules. And now I understand that if you're ready, Jennifer West of California Water Reuse has a public comment. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you very much, panelists. I really appreciate listening to the update, and it's very informative. The initial recommendations went pretty quickly, and there was one in particular that struck me with some concern. Unfortunately, I had some audio issues. Well, the vast majority of the discussion was happening about it, but let me just kind of restate what I think I heard, which was the recommendation is, which I understand now, is the second draft allows the ozone BAC to be somewhere else before not necessarily before the RO process. That's the default, but the project applicant would have to show that if they did have another treatment train option, they would have to show and demonstrate that it was just as protective of public health. That was what I understood from the last version, the rationale, rather than going through the alternative clause. My understanding was the draft was it's before the RO, but the onus would be on the project proponent to show that there was that, that they could use another option for the future when that is developed. So I think I was trying to understand the rationale for changing that. That still seems like a pretty robust way to protect public health rather than moving the whole thing to the alternative clause, which is there, and I understand that. I did also want to say for the alternative clause itself, we would like to see the alternative clause be broadened to include all aspects of the regulation, similar to how the groundwater regulations are. I'm not sure if that's part of the recommendation regarding the alternative clause. And my understanding is no one has used the alternative clause. I think the previous draft recommendation, as maybe I'm misunderstanding how I was interpreting it, that it was the default, that it would be ozone BAC would be before RO, but there would be this process to allow the project proponent to show that they had another project, another process that was provided equivalent public health protection. So obviously this is a major issue. So I just kind of wanted to flag that and understand why the current draft wasn't protective enough. And like I said, there might have been some conversation on this during the back and forth. I was having audio issues. I know you were talking about it somewhat, but if you could kind of focus on why this rather than the current draft on this particular issue.
Jennifer, I apologize for those audio problems. Brian, Adam,
Jennifer, this is Adam. You're asking the panel to explain why we think ozone BAC should, the current draft, why it should change to put ozone BAC ahead of the RO. Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking, I think the current draft, so maybe I'm wrong about my interpretation of the current draft, but I think the current draft says that ozone BAC is before the RO unless the project proponent can come up with a different process or demonstrate that they have a different treatment that provides equivalent public health protection. And rather than kicking all of that all the way to the alternative clause. So I guess my question is, why isn't the current draft with that, why is that problematic?
Well, first off, ozone, the way we read it, ozone BAC is not after the RO is not the appropriate place. It doesn't work, and it doesn't work for what we were concerned about, at least when the first panel was looking at it, for low molecular weight compounds. Nor would it work because, as Jorg described very clearly, the organisms wouldn't be there, and you would have to end up adding carbon or recreating the system at the back end. So it makes no sense really to offer to put it up front at the current time. It's not saying that the future might not hold something different, or with all the various blending options that are allowed, you might come up with a different treatment train. So for the first draft, if you want to make it public health protective at the get-go, it should be before the RO. We're not saying that the regulation shouldn't allow for alternatives to be considered. In addition to that, we're not saying that we're not trying to stop that. We're just saying, let's just focus on what's important and why it's there and where it should be.
No, and I thought that the revised last draft had it before the RO, but then had more of an integrated process that said, unless there, in the future, there can be, the project proponent can show the future treatment train would provide equivalent public health protection. I guess the concern about, putting this completely into the alternative clause when it hasn't been used before, I'm just concerned about the future. I just think the regulations could be more flexible and adaptive with that kind of language. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I thought that the current regulation said it's there before the RO, unless there can be demonstration. I guess that was my comment. So, but I know I appreciate you explaining the at this point the need for it, and I appreciate that. So
yeah, maybe we read we read stuff differently sometime. We didn't. The panel didn't.
I mean, I guess that's a question for DDW. Is that what you intended when you wrote that? I mean, the placement of this is a major issue. So, and I understand that you're saying this can happen in the alternative clause, but as I said, since it hasn't been used before, it seems like it would be more if there was a way to integrate this, because it's such a macro issue, into, it's the default that it's before the RO, unless the proponent could show an equivalent public health protection. So if it's not written that way, I guess that would be my suggestion. So we'll just leave it there, but that's an issue for a lot of agencies. And I think that's really it. I really appreciate, again, the conversations on all the other issues, and your time and effort on keeping everybody up to speed on this.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
Jing, do we have any other folks who wanted to make a public comment?
I don't see any requests coming in.
Well, very well then. We're past our appointed adjournment time of 10 o'clock by just a few minutes. I appreciate everyone's patience. Before we log off, I wanted to say thank you to Jennifer for her comments, and say that I'm sure the board will consider your valuable input, and thank you very much. Before we adjourn the meeting, I want to turn it over to the co-chairs or panelists for any final remarks. Okay, well, I appreciate everyone's time today. Folks at the State Water Board, thank you for your support through this process. We appreciate and are very much look forward to working through this process to the very end. We're really in a great spot. I think I've been pleased with the level of productivity so far, and look forward to delivering a really important project for the state of California and our statewide water resiliency. I want to thank everybody for their participation today. And without any further ado, I'd like to declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Stay warm wherever you are.